The evolution of man's brain. When each of you as gods decided you wanted to live in physicality, the biological brain had to be adapted so that you could use it differently. Otherwise, these brain systems would have just been the same as any of your animals upon the planet and would serve basically one function. This biological brain is simply your primitive brain or your primate brain. The biology of your physical embodiments and the biology of the planet are a little bit different. If these embodiments were at the stage that the planet itself is, through its own biological evolution, your brain would be much different than the ones you're using now. You would have one basic brain, and this brain would be for instinctual behavior and animal behavior. Each of you already have this within your brain systems. This portion of your brain is dealing strictly with the primitive or the survival instinct, the animal behavior. Your brain today has basically three functions. You have primarily your biological brain from the planetary system, but you also have portions of your brain that were developed later to help you evolve these biological embodiments. Each of you are a biological embodiment, but you are also a light being. When your light hit the edge of time-space medium, you refracted into multiple pieces. When you refracted into multiple pieces, each of those portions sought out an embodiment in physicality. When it did this, some portions of you went into your past, some portions went into your future, and some right now into your present time. If you could see it as a nucleus of light hitting the edge of the time-space medium, and at the edge of the time-space medium it refracts. When it refracted, portions of you went into all different time periods, forwards and backwards, historically speaking. The body has a biological time clock, and so only bodies have history in that perspective. The light you are went into all the bodies at the same time. This is why it is considered simultaneous time by our perspective. The body does not understand simultaneous time in the same manner as the light that you are does. Since you are a light being living simultaneous lives, any embodiment that you were in needed to be aware of all the rest of the light that you were. This was necessary in order to allow you to have a continuity, to understand everything that you were learning and to embrace everything that you were. The core of light that you were hit time-space. When it refracted, let's say it refracted into 10 particles. Most of them refracted into more pieces than that. Let's say each of those 10 particles went into a different time in history. Each of those went into a different perspective of history by the reckoning of the biological time clock of bodies. Each body knows its own biological time clock, so therefore it has a beginning and an end. However, light doesn't. Light cannot comprehend linear time. Since light cannot comprehend linear time because it is in all places at once, you have the 10 particles of you that came out of the same core. And from what they understand, they're living all 10 of these lives at the same time. The bodies aren't necessarily living them all simultaneously, but the light is. Since the light that each of you are is living each of these lives at the same time, you have simultaneous time. Biologically, you do not have simultaneous time. Biologically, you have linear time. Light and spirit have simultaneous time and do not comprehend or know linear time. So the light particles that you are now, the core having split into 10 light particles, for example, each went into a different biological functioning. This allowed them to have the perspective of linear time. However, since it was a light particle, it cannot be separated into linear time and must be doing all things at once. When you put yourselves into these embodiments, a portion of you had to be able to keep track of where the other parts of you were at any one given time. At that point in time, when you chose the embodiment to move into, the brain structure was not equipped to handle simultaneous time or to even understand it. What you had to do is actually grow a new apparatus of your brain. At this point in time, the second piece of your brain was grown. The second piece of your brain is totally equipped to keep track of every piece of you, no matter where you are, past, present, or future. It keeps track of and actually holds all of the experiences that the core of light is having in all 10 of its expressions. So this portion of your brain literally keeps track of you so that you are focused here. Then you, as that light particle, can focus into this body in this time and this space, but still keep track of all of the other experiences you're having. This allows you to gain wisdom at a much faster rate since you're sharing the experiences of and learning from all the other particles. The second portion of your brain has two functions. One, it keeps track of all of your lifetimes. It keeps track of what you term past, present, and future lives. This portion of your brain has two sets of chemical membranes in it and works from a much more chemical principle and light principle than the rest of it. One set of membranes keeps track of your light from a linear perspective. It says, this is this linear lifetime. I was birthed here, I will die here, and this is where I'm in the progression. It keeps you, the light that you are, focused in linear space. If the chemical membrane for your linear set of membranes in that portion of your brain becomes weak, damaged, or is penetrated, this creates symptoms like those of Alzheimer's disease. An individual has learned either how to break the membrane, how to transcend the chemical membrane, or how to change it. And so they get out of it. And when they come back in, they're not sure which portion of the linear space to come back into. They might get out of it and jump around. They might jump from being a 67-year-old to a 12-year-old. They might then go to 20s or to 40s to 30s to teens. The second portion of this brain function runs the whole totality of all your other experiences simultaneously. This is what individuals do when they go into a past life regression. All they are doing is penetrating the chemical membrane of that portion of their brain and going into that experience of light in another existence at that same time. The particles refracted from the core are all living at the same time and don't know that they're each in a linear perspective. This portion of your brain literally keeps track of all of them so that you can interchange experience, interchange information, attitudes, and perspectives. Some of you are so tied into linear perspective that the chemical membrane is very hard for you to penetrate in order to go into another experience. Therefore, a lot of individuals might never be able to penetrate it to find a past life or other experience. When you go into a past life regression, you're actually going into your own mind, into your own brain, and understanding it through the second brain structure. That is why, since you're understanding it through this brain structure for this current time, it has to be interpreted here through whatever your belief system, your attitude, and what your language is now. You penetrate your own chemical membranes within that portion of your brain very easily by altering your own brain waves. In a regressed state, a relaxed state of mind or hypnosis, and an individual is actually penetrating their own chemical membrane within their brain. As they are doing this, they will actually pinpoint into one of these other perspectives of light, their own light, living in another embodiment, in another historical time or linear space. They will perceive all of the perceptions of that portion of their light, but they will have to perceive it through the embodiment they're in now and the way this brain structure is functioning. That light particle could be in another embodiment, someplace else having an experience. Its experience is going to be a little bit different than your interpretation of the experience here, because it has to filter through your brain system in this present time. That is why when you go into regress states, you often have difficulty with names, dates, and places. Those are things understood by that light particle in that linear space. It doesn't interpret well into this one. Through its chemical membrane, the brain structure will actually distort or change it to perceive it here and now. The brain functions by triggering electrical charges across these chemical membranes. Let's say a certain chemical charge is needed in order to interpret an experience, and this brain system that the light is in now isn't picking it up. You're going to have a glitch or a piece of memory out of that one that can't come through to this one because the brain structure won't interpret it. This is why often when you try to understand past experiences or regressions, you're going to miss pieces of it. This is also what happens in many channeling experiences. In many channeling experiences, this membrane portion of your brain is the one that is primarily used. It allows the actual light particle to travel through simultaneous time rather than being in linear space. The membrane allows it the freedom to go into simultaneous time in all its perspectives, wherever they are, and translate them back through this brain system. When most individuals have guidance or when they are channeling, they are simply penetrating their own chemical membrane in their brain. They are actually stepping into one of their own experiences in another time and space and are literally learning how to interpret it into this one. Let's say the core split into 10 different light pieces and is living in 10 different historical linear spaces biologically. That means each of those lights has a different embodiment. Every one of your embodiments carry a different chemical structuring in their brains. Let's say you have a portion of you that lived 1,000 years ago in your terminology. The chemical structuring and the electronic firing of that brain is different than yours today. That means that when that information is trying to be translated and understood by this brain system, there are going to be pieces and glitches and things missing from it because your brain system runs on a different chemical and electrical basis than the brain system did. It would be like trying to send Morse coding, and one person sends it very rapidly and the other can't interpret it that fast. Since they don't, they catch pieces of it, and these pieces seem to form words, images, or pictures. That is what is happening now. Your brain systems are working on a different firing pattern than they were even 100 years ago. They technically are working at a different rate of speed. So therefore, anything out of your past that is trying to come through is going to come through at a different rate of electrical and chemical firing than your brain system uses today. Your brain says, well, here's the first couple letters of the word. I'll fill in the word. You often do that when people start talking. They start to say a word and you fill in the word for them in your own mind before it is even spoken. Your minds do this with the past. When your past is trying to be translated into these brain structures, the past is firing at a different rate of patterning, and therefore, it looks like it is going to have a certain image or a certain picture. This changing of your chemical and electrical firing is what allows you to grow into your brain systems so that you know you're not 5 years old anymore. There is a minute portion of this brain system that is also like a clock that doesn't let you back up. It continually fires at a much. I'll use the term rapid. It is a little bit different concept, but it would be much as if it changes its speed. Let's say that if you were 1 year old, it would be at a slow pace. If you're two, a little bit faster so that you can no longer interpret the 1 year old. By the time you're 5 in a linear space, it is firing at such a rate that you can no longer relate to the younger age. This is actually what allows the light that you are to keep track of the linear time and space in these bodies, because the light does not understand or comprehend linear time. This portion of the brain is literally designed with a mechanism of its own to keep you up to date with where you're supposed to be. That means that this portion of your brain is actually firing differently than it was a year ago or even a month ago. It allows it to pick up speed so that you can't backtrack and lose your focus in linear time. So now we're trying to connect with something that you term your past or past experience. It's going to be firing chemically and electrically in a different pattern than where your brain is now. Since it does, you won't have the same interpretation. This brain will try to interpret it according to where your brain is firing now. Since it is slow in comparison, your brain will try to fill in the pieces. Your past life or regression is coming so slowly that your mind just wants to fill in the pieces and get it done with. That is why sometimes it doesn't match what you find historically. Your mind will fill it in with what it understands now rather than the true picture or the true understanding. There are also portions of your light that went into what you would call your future. Since they are your future, the chemical firing and reaction of that portion of your brain that is dealing with them is working at an even different rate. So if you try to connect with these future lives, it would be similar to connecting with a past life. If you tried to connect with it and bring up the information or translate it from there, you're still going to have the same difficulty translating it across the chemical membrane and the firing sequences. We've been discussing the second brain, the brain of simultaneous time, or the brain that deals with linear time and space. We will refer to as the time-space portion of the brain, or the light brain. In the beginning, the second portion of your brain, or your time-space brain, was very open. Since it was very open, you knew every portion of that light particum at the same time. That portion of your brain was simultaneously aware of every one of those 10 pieces that had fractured from the core light. But problems began happening. Let's say that you were in a situation that you were grandly at peace, no problem. But one of the other 10 light particles from your same core light was under predatory attack. That entity portion of you that was under predatory attack would make the brain structure react in fear to preserve it. You, sitting in your historical time space, would do the same thing, and you didn't need to. Because you were so open to understand and be aware of all of your perspectives at the same time, it began to give you problems. It actually moved it to a place where you would be triggered by one of your other light particles in another experience that had nothing to do with you. All of a sudden, you could feel that you had to flee because something predatory was coming upon you. It had nothing to do with you in that time and space, but you felt it. This began to create confusion for all of you. If one of the light particles, wherever they were in linear space and time, began reacting to all the others, it was very chaotic for the individual. At this point in time, all of you upon the planet could read each other's thoughts. You didn't have language. This portion of your brain is also the portion that interprets thought waves. It is what interprets everything else from the planet and actually allows you to communicate. So this portion of your brain does not only work with linear time and space, but it also deals with what you call your telepathy. Since you could read each other's minds and brains, you would begin reacting to what everybody else was thinking. This was the beginning of social consciousness on this planet. This was the beginning of your very first gestalt here. The lights that you were came into these bodies, built the second brain, and adapted them for your own use. Not only was the core light that you were in 10 different linear perspectives making you react, but so was everybody else on the planet. Everybody else who came into contact with you in your state of telepathy, whatever their mind was doing and whatever they were perceiving, was also triggering this portion of your brain and creating the same behavioral instincts for your body. It began to become very chaotic. You got to a point of not wanting to read everybody else's thoughts and not wanting them to read yours, because everything you thought, so did they. Everything you felt, so did they. Everything that you were reacting to, so did they. You began altering your chemical firing and your electric charges in the second portion of the brain so they couldn't be interpreted anymore. You literally shut this portion of your brain off, that all it did was focus you here and now. You didn't want any other focus or anybody else's input in it whatsoever, including your own. Each of you individually began to alter your whole chemical responses in this portion of your brain so that it would actually filter out anybody else's thoughts. Each of you began to develop your own individual Morse coding, chemically speaking, that no one else could penetrate. Since each of you altered these portions of your brain and changed them to fit your own purposes, it is very difficult for anybody else to get into them or to understand them. It is even difficult for each of you to get through this portion of your brain. Your whole chemical membrane and the firing system for this portion of your brain became just like your own fingerprint for this existence. In other words, nobody can penetrate that unless they know your exact access code, so to speak, or your exact way of chemically firing in this portion. This portion of your brain is so intricately yours that nobody else can get through it unless they are a portion of you. It is so intricately yours that even your own guidance has difficulty getting through it. That is why it is very difficult to have clarity in this portion of your brains. This is why it is very difficult to use it or to heal it, but it can be used, it can be dealt with. This is the portion of your brain where most of your own guidance is going to come through when it comes through the brain system. This is the portion of your brain that was actually created for the light. So therefore, it is the light brain and deals with the time-space medium. It interprets and is intertwined with your primitive brain in order to create a synergy for the body and the light that you are to live together. The next and third portion of your brain, we're going to call the interpretive portion of your brain. In your light brain and the interpretive brain, there are major portions that seem to be dead or totally unused, and your medical profession does not understand them or what they do. When your light became so entrapped in these brain systems that they no longer could get out of them, and they could no longer get out of the biological species or linear time space, you actually had to find a whole new interpretive way of getting into them. This led to the development of the third portion of the brain. Many of you have not yet accessed this portion of your brain. It is usable, totally functionable, and is there. This is the portion that you will use for your higher expansions of consciousness and evolution. It was created for interpreting higher consciousness into the light brain and then into the primitive brain. Your second brain, or your light brain, became so enclosed and encased that you could no longer interpret your own guidance, so you began to create this interpretive brain. This interpretive brain can interpret from the feeling center into an intellectual understanding or comprehension. In its pure state, it can take you into evolution and expansion of consciousness. When you began to use this third portion of your brain, your intellects were born. Originally, your first brain only gave you the animal behavior instincts. The function of the second brain, or the light brain, was to keep track of the light, access the guidance of the light, to keep the light in the body and functioning. The third brain had to be developed to get you out of the density that you created by putting the light so deep into biological structuring. The third brain was added to interpret it so it could understand your own light and be able to get out. It was created to understand the animal behavior and actually evolve yourself out of the biological animal behavioral instinct. In your solar plex region, you have other gray matter, and we'll call that the solar plex mind or the heart mind. This was designed to create and receive feelings. It was your feelings center. The gray matter in the solar plex mind and the gray matter in the third brain were added at the same time. They work together in order to get you out of the density you created by entrapping your light in your second brain or the light brain. The solar plex mind, or the heart mind, was created to receive all feelings or abstract thought. Since the light was shut off in the light brain, you were interpreting it because you didn't really have a package to do that. When that second portion of your brain was added, it was to hold the light in these bodies. You hadn't comprehended that by holding the light in these bodies that it would become as any other animal upon the planet. You didn't quite realize that, and therefore you sought a way of gaining once again your higher guidance and to have a connection with the universal principle. The solar plex mind was added and created for that purpose. It was created to feel, so it and the interpretive portion of your brain were created to feel and work together in order to help the light brain get out of the animal instinctual behavior. The solar plex mind was created to bring in the abstract thought or lesson, feel it, and send it up to the interpretive brain. The interpretive brain would then interpret it into a language, a sequence of Morse coding, if you will, or chemical and electrical firings to help these instinctual humanoid species to get out of the density they were in and evolve this biological vehicle into a vehicle that the gods could use for their own purposes. All right. At this point in time, this interpretive portion of your brain was created to work in harmony with the solar plex mind. If the two worked in harmony, the abstract thought or feeling would come into the solar plex mind, go up, and be interpreted by the interpretive brain. Push from there through the light brain and light centers into the primitive brain to mature and evolve the biological species. If it needed to, it could actually change biologically anything that needed to be changed in the bodies. All of the altering of your genetic structure comes from this portion of your brain where it actually connects the interpretive mind to the light and primitive brains. Where these three come together is the portion of your brain that deals with your genetics and the physical imprinting. When you began to use that imprinting, the species grew. At that point in time, the species changed and altered dramatically, very, very quickly. The fastest biological evolution these vehicles have ever had is when these three came together and worked. At that point in time, the light brain moved into a place of still wanting to have a different thought process and firing sequence than everybody and everything else. So once again, it began to create another chemical membrane around it and actually altered the new genetic packaging it was creating. Because the individual's light wanted to still be isolated from everything else, it started setting up chemical and electrical firing as a barrier around the interpretive brain. And now you're entrapped in the genetics. Now you've literally cut yourselves off from even using the interpretive brain portion of your package. That portion of your brain package is dormant. It was fully functioning for a period of time. During that period of time, you used it enough to change the genetic structuring, and that genetic structuring is being passed down. But you genetically predisposed these embodiments not to use that portion of the brain because you set up a chemical electrical firing around it that enabled you to no longer get into the interpretive portion of your gray matter. When this interpretive portion of your brain begins to be fully functioning, it will step you outside of this physical expression. It is what is going to evolve you and expand you. Most of your journey is to release a lot of these limiting chemical structure in your brain. Much of that comes from releasing the old attitudes that created it in order to create a synergy where you can use the whole totality of your brain system. The interpretive brain is not going to be functioning and fully opened again until the solar plex mind and the heart mind are opened up, functioning, and sending its messages into the interpretive brain to be interpreted. Right now, the solar plex mind has either shriveled on a lot of you and so is not working the way it could, or it is working very little. What it brings in, it shoves in the genetic memory portion of your brain to be interpreted in genetic memory, then shoves it into the light brain, which shoves it into the animal or primitive brain. Since it does this, anything that comes in that could be able to evolve you into the higher level of consciousness is actually being shoved into your animal behavior and instincts. The portion of the brain called the intellect is what creates your genetic structuring. It is where the three tried to come together, and at that point in time, the interpretive mind tried to move into a place of overcoming the other two and their limitations. But since it did not fully overcome them, you ended up with a portion of your brain that establishes your genetics, passes them down, but also has established an intellectual mind. That portion of gray matter in your solar plex region, we label the fourth mind or fourth brain. Actually, your brain is simply for receiving thought. I would prefer to call this fourth mind the solar plex mind because it actually deals more with non physical input or thought feelings than it does with the interpretation of it. Although mind and brain are terms that are commonly used interchangeably, we generally refer to the brain as the physical portion of the thought process and the mind as the non physical portion of your thought process. The mind is actually the auric field, electromagnetic field, or what we like to call the biofield that surrounds your embodiment. Your brain systems translate. They do not think. They do not create thought. All they're doing right now is actually taking everything that comes into the mind or biofield, interpreting it and using it. They are actually just receiving thought and interpreting it according to your attitudes, your belief systems, your perspectives, and creating your realities out of it. The solar plex mind or the heart mind is actually your feeling center that allows you to go into your interpretive portion of the brain. A lot of you are not using it to the depth that you need to in order to create the electrical charge to reawaken that portion of your brain. Your brain systems work from an electrical and chemical charge. If you're going to get into this interpretive brain portion, you're going to have to create the electrical and chemical charges to wake it up and use it. Until it is awakened and is being used, it is just going to appear to be dormant. This interpretive portion of your brain is still connected where you want it to be and is functioning there. That is why it feels as if somebody is controlling your life. That is why it feels as if your guidance can't be heard or can't be seen. That is why it may feel as if your life is going on without you. It is either running off the animal instinctual behavior or that portion of the interpretive mind in the non-physical region, and you're not aware of it, and you're just not aware of it because it's not interpreting through. The solar plex mind has the ability, when you use a feeling tone and you take it deep into your feelings and understanding your feelings, to actually recreate the chemicals that are needed for that interpretive brain. The more you feel, the more you're creating the electrical and chemical charges that you need to think and chemical charges that you need to link your entire brain system together so that it functions as a whole. This is what awareness is. Self-awareness comes when you're fully aware and the consciousness of your whole brain system is working together. Right now, you have a primate brain working on physicality, trying to keep you alive. You have your light brain working and playing in other realities and other realms. You have your interpretive brain working in a non-physical region. And you have your solar plex brain closed down or off in most cases. You have this other portion where the three had come together and facilitated genetic evolvement, and that's the only one that is working. Since that is working, it is tying all the brain portions together through your genetics right now. What this means is that your genetic structuring is the point that is tying the primitive brain, the light brain, and the interpretive brain and the solar plex brain all together as your genetic packaging. That is why most of you are running off your physical genetics rather than off of your mind. What does the pituitary contribute to the functioning of all these portions of the brain? The pituitary system and the pineal system are light sensitive, which means that they were originally designed as an appendage of the second or light brain. The pituitary and the pineal system were created to help direct the light that you are into the totality of the rest of your embodiment. In all animals on your planet, the pituitary system is what orchestrates or controls the light that flows within the animal. When you moved into these biological embodiments, you already had a pituitary system. It was much different than the pituitary system you've evolved into now. The pituitary system actually responds to light. Whenever you move into grander spaces of light within the embodiment, the pituitary system opens. As it opens, it begins to create the synergy for the brain systems within your head. Whenever there is more light in your embodiment, it is going to come through feeling yourself into love, into life. As you feel yourself into that joy and bring those levels of joy back up into your embodiment, that begins to trigger the pituitary system. When it triggers the pituitary system, being at the center of your brain structure, begins to open. As it begins to open, it begins to chemically change the hormones and the electrical firing of your whole brain system. When the pituitary system is open and functioning, it actually can work to tie all of the other brain structures into one synergy so that they work in harmony. If the brain structure is not working in harmony, then you're going to have diseasement in the body. You're going to have aging in the body, and you're going to have disconnection between the various portions of the brain. This is why there is so much emphasis put upon the pituitary system in the brain. It is not necessarily what you term a third eye. The reason that working with the pituitary can give an individual more expansive knowledge and more expansive understanding is because when it opens, it actually interprets. It actually ties into the interpretive brain as well as the primate brain and the solar plexus mind and the light brain. It ties all of them together into that synergy so that you're actually interpreting the feeling in the whole brain system. The pituitary system controls everything in your whole body, including the flow of your fluids in your body and the control of whether you sleep or are awake. All of these things are orchestrated by the pituitary system in accordance to the needs of the light in the body. So whenever the body biologically gets too void of light, the pituitary system goes to work and actually begins to try to create a new balance. Your blood pressure is run through the pituitary system. A lot of other things are run through the pituitary system in its effort to try to create grander light or grander amounts of energy or electrical charge for the entire embodiment. To open the pituitary system so that it opens the brain requires grand amounts of love and grand amounts of joy. Realize that the only time the joy is going to reach the levels needed in order to open that pituitary system is when the solar plex mind is opened by bringing in the feeling. There are many ways to facilitate this. You can meditate upon it. You can try to open it. You can do any of these things you wish to do. The fastest and easiest way to do it is just by feeling joy. When you bring the vibration of joy into your embodiment, it has to come through the heart. Whenever you're feeling joy, it is felt in the heart center or solar plexus mind and flows into the entire embodiment from there. Joy is one of the few vibrations upon this planet that is isolated and concentrated into the heart mind center. Since joy does that, it activates it. When it is activated, that immediately sends a signal to your pituitary system, allowing the pituitary system to relax open. As it relaxes open, it moves into a place of triggering the entire brain, so it works as the interpretive package it was intended to. When it does this, you move into states of awareness, you move into states of psychic abilities, and you begin to view different perspectives. It is within all of you to be able to have a fully functioning brain. Even if genetically you have been predisposed or passed down into generations where the brain is partially closed, when the brain does not fully work because of the chemical membranes that have been designed in it, every one of you, simply by feeling those levels of joy, bringing that into your being and allowing yourself to vibrate at it, have the ability to change your brain system very fast and very easily. Most of you do not allow yourself to stay in those levels of joy long enough to recreate the chemical membranes that your brain needs in order to create the harmony in it. The joy and bringing those feelings of joy very deeply into the totality of your life is what is going to trigger that brain back into complete openness. Even in an individual whose brain is partially damaged, partially closed, it is not functioning properly, the easiest way to heal them is to put them back into a state of joy. Bring the joy back up into their life again. And this will actually teach their entire brain system how to work around those damaged portions and either heal them or to actually move into that interpretive brain and begin to function out of it and use it. Joy is the grand healer of the brain and the grand healer of the totality of each of you.